Hello, my name is Amber, and welcome to You Look Like a Badger, a monthly podcast where I discuss queer cinema. This month is December. I'm very excited about this title, so brace yourself. The name of this month is Happy Holidays, and December is dedicated to queer movies that are set during the holidays. And the film that I've picked for the last episode of the year is Make the Yuletide Gay.
Nathan, dear, I hope you don't mind being on bottom.
Excuse me?
The bunk beds.
Oh.
I remember when Sven and I got these beds for little Olaf. He scampered right up that ladder, jumped up and down screaming, I want to be on top! I want to be on top! It was so cute. So you don't mind, do you?
Actually, Mrs. Gununderson, in our dorm room, I'd much rather be on top.
Oh.
In the bunk beds, that is.
Must have got a jump on you when you first moved in, eh?
Yes, he did.
Make the Yuletide Gay is a 2009 Rob Williams Christmas film centering on Gunn, a closeted gay man returning home from college for the holidays who's planning on coming out to his family when his boyfriend suddenly turns up at his door. Low budget and definitely more tongue-in-cheek than the premise would suggest, the film captures the conflict that lies behind coming out and explores the dynamics that two different gay people have with their two very different families. This film won the Audience Award at Film Out San Diego and the Seoul LGBT Film Festival for Best Feature, and the Jury Award at Long Island Gay and Lesbian Film Festival for Best Men's Feature. On Rotten Tomatoes, it has a 40% critic score and an audience score of 63%, and on Letterboxd, it has a 2.9. So, generally not that well received. But there is definitely an audience for it. I mean, it won some awards and the audience score is pretty good on Rotten Tomatoes, which is very surprising when I first saw it. Out of all the films that I covered this year, this is not the film that I thought would have this good of a reception. Let's read some reviews from Letterboxd. User Mike says, "This is what Love, Simon would have been if it had the budget and script writers of an amateur porn studio. So basically, it would have been a better movie." I like this review because there is something just very, I can't even describe it, like endearing about the way this film is shot and written, because it's a film that I don't think is trying to appeal to a mainstream audience. It's very much for the niche of gay men who want to watch a Christmas movie. Which is in contrast to Love, Simon, that was trying to reach a wide audience. I think Make the Yuletide Gay is very endearing and possibly more sincere than Love, Simon. I actually haven't watched Love, Simon in a very long time, so I don't know what my feelings really are on it, other than I quite liked it when I first saw it. I haven't really updated them beyond that. I'm sure I'll cover it on this podcast at some point, but yeah, I think it's just nice to watch a film that was made by queer people, even if the budget isn't very high and maybe the writers don't care that much about making something quote unquote good, but they want to make something like fun to watch. And I like that. Harper Thompson on Letterboxd said that the middle-aged northern woman is always the best character in a holiday movie. Last Christmas, I managed to find just a bunch of Lifetime/Hallmark movies that, that they put on during Christmas, and I found that this review is correct. The, middle-aged mother character is usually the best character in these films, and that's true of this film as well. And the last review from user I'm Keen, they say, "This is what Happier Season was trying to do and failed at." The reason I included this review is because I didn't think that I'd ever find someone who held pretty much the exact same opinion as me. I think I'm planning on doing Happier Season at some point, so I'm not going to go into my thoughts on it too much, but I think the way that that film and this film handles the coming out part of the story is really interesting. And by interesting, I mean this film, despite having a lower budget and lower star power, handles it a lot better, and I think a lot more empathetically than Happier Season did. And I'm sure I'll get into why when I discuss Happier Season, but I'm not going to discuss it here. All I can say is that I think this film is a lot more sweet and very much tries to understand where both parties are coming from, even if it's really campy and silly and doesn't take itself that seriously most of the time. I'm going to give a spoiler warning, final spoiler warning of the year. If you have not seen this film and it was on your watch list and you haven't gotten round to watch it and you really want to, and you feel as though this podcast would spoil that experience for you if you were to hear details of the film before you'd seen it, then what you got to do, you got to go get a pen and some paper. You got to write this down, okay? You got to pause this episode. You got to watch the film, then come back, unpause this episode, listen to the rest of my thoughts, okay? Got it? Good.
I don't know why you don't move out of the dorm already. Get yourself a nice little apartment somewhere, big enough for you and a special someone. You're never going to meet a nice girl living in an all-male dorm. You're going to end up like old Clay Handelman down the road, never married and having to keep a roommate like that nice hairdresser that lives with him.
Really, the best place to start would be to talk about Christmas and what it represents in terms of culture and also just in terms of the traditional family. In many ways, Gunn's parents are quite non-traditional. They're very involved in his life and they want to be a part of it, and they ask a lot of questions about his romantic life, and they seem as though they care a lot and they're very empathetic. In the same way, they're very progressive in the way that you wouldn't think a lot of parents would be. So, you know, there's like the running weed joke with the dad who is constantly high all the time. So the film sets up that they are somewhat antithetical to what we would expect of like traditional American parents who would be more conservative than their more liberal children. But they are deeply invested in Christmas. In fact, the house in this film seems like the most Christmas house there ever was. Because you've got the biscuits and there's lights everywhere. You've got the Christmas jumpers and there's a lot of focus on tradition, which if you look at the Gunn's parents, they don't seem that invested in tradition elsewhere. So I think the first kind of inkling towards Gunn's hesitance to come out to his parents is this thought that even though they have a lot of progressive views, they're still very invested in tradition, in like the traditional family. They convey the idea that they're invested in Gunn conforming to that, to enjoying Christmas in the way that they do. So they exist on this spectrum of progressiveness where they are quite liberal and they are very invested in Gunn's happiness and individuality, but at the same time they like conformity to some extent and they seem to follow like the steps of what a traditional marriage would be. His parents were married straight out of high school, and you know there's this story where Gunn's mother gave birth on school campus. What the film does quite well is it gets us to invest in Gunn's fear surrounding his parents. It doesn't treat it as hysterical or paranoid. It doesn't treat it as though he's overreacting, because there are a lot of like hints that maybe they wouldn't be okay with him being gay. There are explicit discussions in the film where Nathan and Gunn, they discuss the politics of coming out. And during those discussions, Gunn asserts that liberal parents might not necessarily be progressive all across the board, and that being oblivious to Gunn's queerness does not mean that they're harmless. This is contrasted with Nathan's parents, who are what you would picture as more conservative. Early in the film, they abandon him for Christmas to go on a cruise. And that tension between Nathan and his parents is specifically because he's gay and out to them. I actually think it's important that the film makes that distinction, but also reasserts that just because Nathan and Gunn's parents are so different doesn't mean that they couldn't share homophobia and bigotry. Something that kind of rubbed me the wrong way about the film was the ending, where Gunn's parents had made a bet that they knew he was gay, or that he would be gay. I don't think I like that. I'm aware that it's meant to be a joke, and that it's deliberately subverting the fact that, oh, it looks like that they're really angry at him and that they're going to throw him out, but it's actually just his dad going to get some money to pay his wife because she was right, he is gay. Like, I understand the joke, that's not that's not the issue. It's more that throughout the film they have not shown any inkling that they knew, and yet allegedly the whole time there was this hanging over him, and they had an idea, or they discussed it at some point. So they did know, but they never brought it up, and they never, they weren't intuitive enough to know that he was hiding something from them. You know, parents, sometimes they will know everything about you except for the fact that you're not straight. So I can kind of see it from like that point of view, but I think everything in the film before this point showed that they fully expected him to be straight, and that they viewed Nathan and Gunn as very close friends or even brothers, but not as being in a relationship. So the idea that they secretly knew the whole time feels like a plot hole, which is not something that I care too much about. I more care about the fact that Gunn's fears in that moment are kind of undermined, because throughout the film there's been this deep fear within him that his weird liberal parents who are obsessed with Christmas are gonna disown him. And in that moment where it was a bet the whole time and they both kind of knew, those fears are kind of undermined. And I didn't really like that, because the whole film had been pretty empathetic towards Gunn and the fact that he hadn't come out yet, and had treated those fears quite legitimately. And I didn't really like that end bit, but you know, I'm probably not going to lose sleep over this film not having continuity, and doing like a cheap joke, because it would be funny if they had a bet the whole time. But you know, up to that point, they'd had pretty consistent exploration of the theme of family and what that means to queer people, and what, you know, as a result, Christmas can represent for them. I just wish it was stronger all across the board.
I do miss one thing from that time.
What?
I miss how my mom treated me before she found out.
A 2021 survey conducted by Pink News found that 82% of people they asked felt they had to hide who they are at Christmas, while 10% said they planned to spend the holidays alone. 68% of readers polled said they find the holidays more stressful because they are LGBT+. What a fun set of statistics. Being closeted and around your family, particularly a lot of family from your hometown, is really uncomfortable, and depending on who you are, really scary. It's hard to find films that explore the safety of the closet and what it means to stay closeted, and it also be a Christmas movie and it also be pretty funny. That kind of balance is hard to come by. So I think I really value films that treat closeted people with respect. So I'm going to say that up top, because you listen to these statistics, and I don't think you have to do a lot of guesswork to work out why people are so uncomfortable or actually fearful of being queer at Christmas. And you can refer back to the first section of this podcast to see why, because Christmas and family are very much intertwined. The happy alternative to this kind of miserable closeted time would be seeking refuge in other queer people. And at the beginning of this film, the main conflict is that Nathan and Gunn wished they could spend the holidays together, but they're both going their separate ways to spend time with their family. That obviously falls through when Nathan is abandoned by his family. So what we get is this queer world and this traditional world like clashing together. And I think it's really nice that even though Nathan is really shocked to find out that Gunn is still in the closet to his parents, that he at least initially supports him needing that time and is willing to pretend to be straight, or at least not be openly gay, which is not an easy task. But the fact that they have each other throughout the film is very nice. I don't know if it's like a recent thing, but I have noticed quite a lot with queer films that closeted characters are really vilified. There's always that scene in the film where the openly gay character asks the closeted character, well, why don't you just come out? And even though it's the most obvious thing, because in the real world, you can't just come out for your own safety. A lot of the time, it's written as though the closeted character is either really silly for staying in the closet, because what do you actually have to be afraid of? Their fears are undermined and they aren't taken very seriously, or they are treated as actively oppressing the openly gay character for also making them stay closeted because the original person has to be in the closet. I was definitely surprised how nuanced this film deals with that, because it's not just immediately Nathan is annoyed that Gunn isn't out to his parents and therefore he can't be. Initially he's very supportive and he supports him needing the time, and then as the film goes on he becomes really hurt with being a secret. And I think the line that was really emotional watching it, when Nathan says, I know it's not fair that I'm hurt by you being in the closet, but it's how I feel. And I think it's really important to add that subjective layer to it, because I found that when closeted characters are represented in this demonizing way where they are the ones causing the pain for the openly gay character, it's very objective, as if closeted characters are inherently evil and terrible and that they should just come out because they're causing the person that we like, usually the openly gay character, a lot of pain. But here, I think because we understand both characters' perspectives, it doesn't feel as harsh or one-sided. I think there are a lot of dynamics at play around being gay around parents who maybe don't understand, about being gay around Christmas time, around family you might not see that often who might have invasive questions, about just existing as a person that your family maybe doesn't know that well because you have a separate life to them, and how hard it can be to explain that. And you are also fighting a lot of already inherited bigotry that they might have surrounding the words gay or queer. It's your sole responsibility to undermine all that and to make sure that they can overcome their prejudices to love you. And I think this film has a lot of conversations in it where it feels as though it's written by people who understand the pain of being in the closet, and it understands why people would stay there. It understands the performance of heteronormativity. It's a running joke throughout the film that Gunn is wearing brown outfits, dressed head to toe in brown, the most disgusting looking clothes you'd ever see. And we see him getting changed in a public bathroom. And it's not said out loud, but that is him making himself look more straight for his parents. What makes the film so strong is it understands why the closet exists and what its function is, and it wants to explore the joys of being out, but it depicts the consequences of that. I mentioned a bit earlier, like Nathan knowing how Gunn feels but still being upset by it. Like, we get this backstory of Nathan not getting the chance to come out for himself. Like, his parents were really emotionally distant from him because they feared that he might be gay, and then he was found by his parents sleeping in the same bed as one of his friends, completely naked, and he didn't get the chance that Gunn now has. And I think that adds to that dynamic of like queer jealousy, which I think I've talked about on this podcast before, where you like envy someone else's experience. So Nathan, who is a very nice person and very understanding of his boyfriend throughout this film, is really hurt, very understandably, by having to be in the closet. At the same time, really fails to understand why Gunn gets all this time to like mull it over and to come out to his parents slowly that he didn't get. And I think that's where a lot of the pain comes from towards the end of the film, where there's like this whole bus stop where Nathan wants to leave because he can't really stand to be around Gunn's family at Christmas, not being able to be himself. There's just a lot of dynamics in the film that are explored like really carefully and with a lot of thought, which is not, like, if you read the reviews for this film, it's not something that you would expect, because a lot of people, like the initial reviews that I read, they view it as very lowbrow and like campy and not good. That's what they view it as. But I think there's a lot of value in this story. And I really was surprised by how accurately it captured queer experiences, like the very like minutiae of queer experiences. There aren't that many queer Christmas films, and I know because I've tried looking for them, and the ones that do exist, a lot of them feel very plasticky and very hollow, and they feel not grounded. They feel like movies. And I'm not saying this film doesn't feel like a movie, because it definitely does. In a lot of ways, it draws attention to the fact that it's a movie, but I think it feels as though it was made by people and not a production company wanting to profit off how trendy gay people are right now. That was just very cynical, but I think I just know too much about trends and how minority groups can be trends for short periods of time, and how annoying that is, because it means you get a lot of people profiting off of marginalized stories without actually understanding them. I want to read this article that I found in Refinery 29 about, it was an account of what it was like being gay at Christmas around a conservative family. And I thought I'd add it into this section because I thought it was really interesting and emotive and does add something to the experience of watching the film. So I'll just read that now. Whatever it is you're keeping from them, your secret creates a space between you. The space between who they think you are and who you know you are inside. The gap between the real you and the fake you. The space becomes a gulf and it fills up with guilt and resentment. What I was worried about was the change. Even if they suspected I was gay, the fact I'd never said it out loud meant we could all keep on pretending. I didn't want them to look at me differently, disappointment, disgust, or even hate. It was change I feared. Sometimes we stay in horrible situations because they're familiar. Familiar feels safe. As horrible as lying was, it was knowable. What was the alternative? The interesting thing about Make the Yuletide Gay is that it shows the alternative. Nathan's story is the alternative. Like, it's a version of Gunn's existence that could very well be a real thing. And Gunn coming out is not a simple thing. Like, it takes the whole movie for him to do it. It ends up coming from a place where he wants his parents to know him and he wants to be able to discuss his life with them. And at the same time, he wants to be able to ease Nathan's inner turmoil, which I know sounds very dramatic, but he wants to be able to share his life with Nathan in public. He says to Nathan that anything I do for myself, I do for you. Coming out in this context is an act of compassion, not just towards Nathan, but towards himself, to ease his mind and alleviate a lot of pain and guilt, which I think is an interesting perspective. I've already discussed how the film ends and how it kind of rubs me the wrong way. And I like to think that this film is very optimistic, that it wraps itself up very nicely in that there really isn't any pain or guilt foregone. But as that excerpt that I read kind of points out, that knowledge can change. It can change people's view of you, and that is kind of permanent. Once they know, and whatever ideas they had about you, they kind of don't exist anymore. We view the ending as a chance for hope, and that good things are coming, and that this process will be easier. I would like to align myself with that point of view. I don't know how much I believe it. For a Christmas movie, it is nice to end with hope and compassion and love and joy. I'm very glad that this film doesn't end with violence. I think that would, one, be tonally really strange, and two, very upsetting for a Christmas film. We should maybe ask if this film looks like a badger. So I've talked about my issues with it, and I would say that my issues with it have absolutely nothing to do with the fact that it's very much a D movie, and it has that kind of acting and quality and that kind of budget. I rarely care about stuff like that. I will watch many low production films and have an excellent time. Other people would disagree. They want high quality stuff. I don't really mind, as long as I feel as though the film is exploring themes well. And I think this film does, for the most part, quite consistently explore what it sets out to in a good and also entertaining way. I fully recognise that this film will not be for everybody, but if you get anything from it, it should at least be that it's so bad that it's good, and that gay people are allowed to have silly Christmas movies as well that are filled with innuendos and weed, apparently. The only other thing I could really think of that would make it badger-like would be, I think some of the stuff hasn't aged particularly well. I wasn't sure if I was going to bring it up, because I'm not really someone who wants to use this podcast as calling out kind of thing, mainly because I think the context of stuff matters and how it functions in the film is also important. So in the film, Nathan and Gunn discuss Chaz Bono's transition, and in doing that, they dead name him. Now, I don't believe, and I've watched this film a couple of times now, that this was done maliciously. The specific context that they discuss his transition, they're discussing what it means to be out and what it means to have your parents accept you. So they're discussing Chaz Bono in relation to Cher and the way Cher reacted to her son's transition. In general, dead naming is bad. I don't recommend it. It's not a very kind thing to do. It can be actively distressing and just not very nice. It's also not accurate. This is me being very pernickety, but it's not accurate to call someone a name that they no longer go by. It's very strange, also transphobic. So I'm bringing it up just because I think something being of its time doesn't make it awful or irredeemable, particularly because the context of the conversation they're having makes sense for the film. The context for Chaz Bono's transition is that he was transitioning in public at the time, and that Chaz Bono's dead name was probably more known than his actual name. I'm not defending it. That I want to make that clear. But I don't think it was done out of hate or spite. I don't think we should make concessions for transphobia of the past, but discussing it in a meaningful context is also important. What do we take away? Don't dead name people, particularly in your movie. That is bad. Don't do that. Does that make the film bad? I personally don't think so. I wanted to point it out because I feel like people could watch it and it could really upset them. I don't want to go along praising this film and then not acknowledge that part of it. I have some recommendations of films that you should also check out if you liked this film. So the first one is another Rob Williams film called Shared Rooms, and I personally prefer this film to Make the Yuletide Gay. It's another Christmas film, which is excellent. One of the gay Christmas films that I like. Ensemble cast of different gay men, and it follows them over the course of Christmas Day and shows how they celebrate Christmas. And it has a similar kind of vibe to this film. Like, it's similarly low budget, very like campy and funny, like very obviously written by gay people. It's worth checking out. The second film that I would recommend is a film called Big Eden, mainly because it has a similar kind of story of going to your hometown and having to kind of interact with people who may or may not know that you're gay and trying to appear as normal as possible whilst doing that. I also think that this film has one of the sweetest romance plots that I've ever seen in like a gay film. I'd really recommend checking that one out. Folks, I would like to thank you for listening to the last podcast of the year, and I would also like to thank you for sticking with me throughout this podcast. If you have checked out any of my other episodes at any point, I want to thank you. If you sat down and you listened to one of my podcasts with a friend and you made fun of it with them and I brought you closer together when you did that, then I like to thank you, and I hope you had a good time listening to me talk about films. I really enjoyed doing this, and I would like to keep doing it in the new year. As I'm posting this video, I am hoping to take a break from the podcast just over the holiday period, just to relax and reset. But I should be coming back in January. I do want to keep this up because it's made me like really focused and really happy. I really just enjoy like the research process and the putting together of something that I can share with people, and just being able to just talk about queerness, because I don't really get to do it in my day-to-day life. I talk about films on Letterboxd, you know. I write reviews and I read reviews, and I like the culture around watching films. I think that's really nice, but I don't have really people who I can talk about queer films in real life. So it's nice to do it here. If you want to stay updated, please make sure to follow me on Twitter at Like a Badger Pod. Please follow me on Spotify and subscribe to me on YouTube. That's where I post the episodes. I assume that's where you're watching them or listening to them. If you would like to read more about my opinions on films, I do write on my blog at ambercanwalk.com. If you enjoyed this and you want to donate some money to me, you can give me some money on Kofi, which I'll put in the show notes. I'm going to put all my research sources in the show notes as well. Once again, thank you very much for listening to me throughout this year, and I should be back in January. See you then. Bye.